It's Thursday, June 10th, and welcome to the New York Amsterdam News Podcast. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. My guest for this episode is Pierre Downing, who is the Vice President of Affordable Housing at Monadnock Development. He's going to be speaking with me about the efforts to create and preserve more affordable housing in the city. The need for affordable housing in New York City is more urgent than ever. Pierre Downing has built his career on making sure New Yorkers have an affordable place to live. Pierre currently serves as Vice President of Affordable Housing at Monadnock Development. The company has established thousands of apartment units in the city in affordable housing and mixed-use buildings. The Am News recently featured Pierre in our Black New Yorker profile, where he discussed his background and work in the industry. And right now he's on the phone with me to talk about what he's doing to increase the number of affordable housing units in New York. Welcome to the podcast, Pierre. How are you?
Hey, Josh. How you doing?
All right, great. Thank you so much. Well, listen, just full disclosure, you and I have actually known each other for a number of years. Back in the day, you did a reality television show called Harlem Heights, and that's actually where we met. But you've built such a great name for yourself with your company and in building affordable housing. Just kind of give us some background on how you got into this, because this is a field that a lot of people who work in development don't necessarily go into, but you decided to go into affordable housing. How did you get into this?
Oh, man. Well, just full kind of disclosure, right? When I was on Harlem Heights, I was doing, working through kind of as a consultant for the Local Initiative Support Corporation. Shout out to LISC, where I was just focusing on, working with nonprofit and for-profit developers to kind of work through, the preservation of their existing affordable housing portfolios. So that was happening on the show, and that show was was a good time. But in terms of like how I got into the industry as a whole, man, it really happened, it was all by happenstance, because I was kind of ignorant and had no idea that there was a complete industry, centered around, the production and creation of affordable housing. Taking a step back, growing up in Trenton, New Jersey, I was a beneficiary of, my family living in subsidized housing, my mother getting rental assistance ultimately, and us being able to move later in life to, a little better school district. And my mother pushed education, and I had a pretty decent jump shot. So ultimately I was able to go to college, get a degree, as the first in my family in doing so. And then when I came out, kind of was like a big smack in the face, like, like a lot of the benefits that you have as an athlete or a student athlete, you don't really have post-college. And, I was in with that harsh reality of finding a job, and I didn't have a network, of people that I could reach out to for either an internship or kind of a new gig. And my mother, right, because the perception is you go to college, you come out, you get a job, or people are biting at the bit, to hire or to employ you. So my mom, that was her impression for sure. And she was, at the time working for the Department of Motor Vehicles down in Trenton, as a state job, in their call center. And she was complaining, about me to her good friend, Janelle Davis. And Janelle, just one night, I guess, when she went home, she was talking, about the conversation she had with my mom to her father, Dana, who was the kind of the head of business development for, this state agency in New Jersey called the New Jersey Housing Mortgage and Finance Agency, and NJHMFA is the acronym. They are kind of the lead agency for New Jersey that is responsible for the production and creation of affordable housing, And when Dana, had heard that, this kid, he graduated college, good kid, was looking for a gig, he ended up reaching out to me. We had a quick conversation, kind of gave him the backstory, and he introduced me to another brother, Mike Staten from HMFA, who ultimately interviewed me and gave me a job. So that was kind of my introduction to, the world of affordable housing, and it was my first job, and I've only worked in this industry since then. But that's how I went in. And then, from there, I got to see a lot of the developers, and, both nonprofit and for-profit, that was coming through the agency, working through complex, real estate transactions to produce, new affordable housing in areas of New Jersey and or preserve existing affordable housing in New Jersey. And it was then I realized that, wow, this is a major industry, and there's not a lot of representation, or people that look like, us, that are doing the work or look like the kind of residents, that they serve on a daily basis. So what does that lead to? Like, oh, it's never really attainable in a kid or father or mother's mind, because they don't see people like them doing it. And that just sparked something in me. And so after, a few years at the agency, I moved on. I got my job at LISC, had a brief stint in reality television. That was a great experience in and of itself. But I never lost sight, of what I believe, my purpose has been to kind of create a career where I'm serving the people that mirror, my mother and my father and my grandmother and, my aunts and my uncles, right? Because we grew up, in public housing, and moved on to some, in project-based Section 8 housing. So, that sparked it, stuck with me, and I've been doing it ever since.
Okay. Amazing work that you're doing. Obviously here in New York City, affordable housing is a huge issue. We're in the middle of a very contentious mayoral and city election that's going on right now, and of course, housing is a number one topic. What I think is interesting about you is that you just said that you grew up in public housing in Trenton, and now you're the one in the position who's creating the affordable housing. Tell us about your experience, living in public housing, and I guess obviously that kind of drove you and inspired you to go ahead and enter this field. But tell us what that was like growing up in public housing in Trenton.
Well, you're talking about the 80s and the 90s.
Okay.
And it was a different time, from, the guys hustling in the building to, the emergence of, gangs, gang activity, and seeing that, so that on the outside, it was really rough. On the inside of the home, right, because you had, missing authority figures, I should say, whether it be a mother or a father, and, in my life, there was my mom, and my father, had his bouts, and he's in my life now, and he's a great grandfather. But there are certain things that kind of influence kind of the way I grew up personally, the way I believe, a lot of people have grown up that come out of, as we say, public housing. It was tough, right? But there was love there in my family. But a lot of the services and the conditions that, families need, right? Because you're talking about my mother was, she was a teenager when she had me, and a single mom at that, right? So she too was faced with trying to provide and raise a child and ultimately another child, on a nominal income. And, that's something that a lot of people struggle with, in the housing that I have been lucky enough or had the opportunity to, preserve and or create. But the experience is, it's systemic, man. It's something that we've been dealing with for years, right? From the construct of public housing and the development of affordable housing in these communities that are lacking services, that don't have, adequate, outlets for healthy food, adequate outlets for open public space for people to enjoy safely, because of the lack of investment. So it ultimately does lead to an experience where you're constantly, on edge, in some cases worried about safety. You are, kind of battling the stress of trying to make ends meet to cover your share of the rent to raise kids. You're battling with the stress that, right, with the food that you're putting into your body isn't necessarily, kind of the same food that others outside of our community might have the luxury to put in their body, which leads to, certain issues like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, cloudy mind. You're not making, like, if you don't have a full stomach, and in a safe place to live, it influences, it causes a ripple effect. That all said, my mother, my grandmother, my aunts, my uncle, it was a support system, and within the housing, there's always a support system in a community that does exist of elders that were, extremely beneficial, to my development. And, kind of when I'm working through deals or meeting with residents, I always keep that in my mind. But and what we're doing today, right, and the work, that I've been blessed to do is thinking about what those issues are or what they were for me, and trying to solve for them through collaborations with nonprofits, or service providers and efforts to provide linkages, for families and individuals to deal, with a lot of the issues that develop, over time from living, in a kind of in a development or a community where it's really institutionalized, right? So that is something that's key and has been an integral part to the work that I've been able to do on the nonprofit and for-profit private side.
And thank you so much for explaining all this, because I think it's important for people to know that there are people in this city who are creating and developing affordable housing who've lived an experience like yours. So you really know the need and what it means to have or obtain a good place to live that's also affordable. During our interview a couple weeks ago, you told me that during your first job at the New Jersey Housing Mortgage and Finance Agency, you came to the realization, and I didn't realize this either, and I don't think people know this, that affordable housing is actually, as you said, a full-blown industry. And,
yes.
When I think of affordable housing opportunities, we see the lotteries, we see the buildings going up, but I don't think people really know what it means to be able to create affordable housing here in the city. Take us through that process again, because you develop affordable housing. But what does that entail exactly to create affordable housing here in New York?
Oh man! So for one, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry throughout the country. Just from a kind of from a 1,000-foot view, every state has an obligation for, to provide, affordable housing, and there's funding, that's set aside, at the federal level that flows down through, state agencies like HMFA, and here in the city you have the New York City Housing Development Corporation and the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. Those agencies are responsible for fostering the development and creation, and preservation of, affordable housing or mixed income housing, and supportive housing. In terms of the process and what that looks like and how you tap into that, it really is kind of a niche, subset of the real estate industry as a whole, because, right, when evaluating, an acquisition, or of either land or an existing stabilized building, you have to kind of set rents at a certain level, which drives kind of the amount of debt, that you're able to support. And, where the city, and state comes in, right, because you're depressing rents, at a level, right, it essentially kind of creates a need for gap financing, so they're able to cover the acquisition and the construction, of a project. And that's where the city steps in and they provide that subsidy, and that subsidy, in exchange for receiving that subsidy, you agree to provide, housing to persons of low and moderate income. Low income housing, like there's a metric, that is called the area median income. To be deemed affordable housing, you have low income is 60% of AMI typically, and when you're like say a family of four, and I'm just throwing that 60% of AMI, I'm not sure it's roughly, I think it's around like 80 grand or so, right, which isn't much, but only 30% of household income can go to pay rent. And then there's an entire application process behind that for a family to like apply for that housing, but you have to fit within a certain box.
Okay. And I know also you're part of NYCHA's permanent affordable housing. I'm sorry, NYCHA's permanent affordability commitment together Renaissance Collaborative, which is PACT Renaissance Collaborative. Tell us a little bit about that program. I know it's something that's quite important here in the city, and is actually helping out a lot of families. Tell us about that.
PACT Renaissance Collaborative, or PRC, is a consortium or collaborative of developers. My company, Kellogg Holdings. You have Monadnock Development. You have Lemoore Development Group, which is also a minority-led business enterprise. You also have, our nonprofit partner, Community League of the Heights and Cloth, along with the Community Preservation Corporation and the Community Development Trust as equity partners in the project. We all form PAC Renaissance Collaborative, and we set, PRC up. PAC Renaissance Collaborative, also known as PRC, was established, back when NYCHA. So NYCHA, I guess, to take a further step back, NYCHA set up, NYCHA over the course of the past few years. They launched, this program called PACT, our Preserving Affordable Commitment Together, which is their acronym for this, or their kind of term used for this program, this federal program called the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, whereby, public housing agencies are able to convert their kind of operating, subsidy that's utilized to fund buildings into, right, you go through a RAC conversion and you're able to convert that into project-based Section 8 subsidy. And then, they enter into a partnership, with a for-profit or nonprofit developer and group to usher kind of the former public housing through a modernization program, whereby all of the buildings and units receive, renovations to address a lot of the disrepair and distress, that these buildings have lived through over time. So NYCHA established this program called PACT, and under PACT they issue RFPs. Developers respond to those RFPs. PRC was the development group that we put together, again, of the entities that I just referenced. We applied for this Manhattan bundle, which is one of 2 mega bundles issued by NYCHA. And the Manhattan bundle is roughly 40 buildings totaling 1,700 units scattered across, Central Harlem, Washington Heights, Kips Bay, Upper West Side, and East Harlem. We were blessed, and lucky enough to win, the RFP, which was very, very competitive. We were competing against, some of the larger developers here in New York City. We were selected and worked with NYCHA over the course of, 2019 and 2020 to execute the closing and convert, the assistance to project-based Section 8, which we were able to leverage and get the debt and raise equity to invest into the buildings. Now we're currently working through the improvements, of the buildings, and we're currently working in, I think it's about 3 or 4 developments right now. So we're actively watching, the units, turn around, and we've begun work, and we've been installing the new kitchens, new bathrooms, new flooring, painting units. We've begun work on the building exteriors and the roofs, and also the heating plants, and residents, are seeing the change, one, and really excited about kind of their kitchens, baths, flooring and painting, but also excited the fact that we're picking up the phone and we're responding, to their needs, to their maintenance requests, and to their issues. But it's been a blessing, and also a challenge, and we will be working through the renovations over the course of the next 2.5, 3 years.
And that's really good to know, because I know for me, I get so many phone calls or emails about issues happening in NYCHA and the great need for repairs in many of our NYCHA apartments. So it's great to know that you are doing that. Have to ask you, because again, I just mentioned we're in a very, very tight, close mayoral race right now, close city council races. And I have to ask you, what do you think that the next mayoral administration needs to do to make sure that affordable housing is not only expanded but also preserved? What are your thoughts on that? What do you think the next leaders of this city should be concerned about when it comes to affordable housing? It's such a hot topic. I know whenever there's a debate or a virtual Zoom debate or candidates forum, this topic of affordable housing seems to always come up. But what should the next leaders of this city be doing to make sure that there's enough affordable housing here?
Well, I think under every administration, since I've been a New York City resident, they always come, with an aggressive affordable housing production plan. I think when I first moved to the city back in 2008 and then went through the Bloomberg administration, there was like a 50,000 unit or 100,000 unit commitment. Then de Blasio came in, it was a 200,000 unit commitment. So I think whomever, the next administration is that comes in, they definitely have to expand. The expectation is that they expand, and have an even greater commitment to the production and preservation and development of affordable housing for the next, 8-10 years. But in terms of what that looks like and where the need is, obviously there is a huge, need, with respect to NYCHA, which I think the de Blasio administration, has been working through aggressively with, the powers that be. And I think there still needs to be continued focus here with respect to NYCHA's housing stock, under the next administration. So that's one. Two, in terms of, a lot of the, rent stabilized housing stock and even, rent stabilized housing stock and with rent reform, you had a lot of like private, investment that went into those buildings, right? Because, developers were looking at, rent stabilized housing as an opportunity, to deregulate and increase rents. Now with rent reform, obviously that's no longer really possible. So what we're finding, and it's evident, especially in light of the pandemic, you have landlords that have started to neglect those buildings because their upside has been taken away. So I think the next administration should really, really focus in, on creative alternatives or ways for us to come in, to inject new capital in, into those units, so that those families and individuals can have the quality of life that they deserve. So I see that as a huge need. I know HPD, has been thinking about that, but it does have to come from the top down. I also think that the definition of what a family might have to look like in terms of income, like those numbers should be expanded.
Absolutely.
To fall into the definition of low-income housing, because you have a whole subset, say teachers and service employees and essential workers, right? Let's give essential workers, right? That kind of make a couple bucks more than what they're allowed to make in order to qualify, for an affordable housing project. So I think retooling that is another, kind of idea, that the administration should take a look at.
Okay. And that's another issue I hear often about is that oftentimes affordable housing isn't always quote unquote affordable because of the income brackets that are sometimes not necessarily fair. Last thing I got to ask you about, I know that you're the co-owner of a bar and I want you to talk about that. On top of doing your wonderful work in affordable housing, you are also a co-owner of a bar, and I always love people who own businesses or co-own businesses or whatever to be able, especially our black folks who are co-owning businesses, to talk about it. Tell us about your bar. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, so it's I'm not one of the operating partners. I'm one of the kind of investor members, or as we say, homies. The bar is called Last Lap. I would say it's like a lounge. It's a safe space for people to go. It's a really, really diverse crowd, and it was really the idea of my buddy Scotty, Bryce, and Vince, and John, to create a space or a place where, I would just say it, man, where we could go as young, black professionals and not feel unwelcome, I should say, right? And it started out as an idea. Then there was kind of a quick deck that was developed. And then it kind of snowballed and became this thing. It's like, there's no real place for us to go hang out as a collective with a bunch of creative individuals, or those from like the real estate world, creative world, entertainment, and just be. And there was a space down the Lower East Side, that was coming up off of lease. The guys did the legwork, all the legwork, and then Last Lap, was born. Last Lap because of really it ties back to Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago, where it's like kind of the last lap around Carnival. So that's how that birthed the name, and the food is Caribbean inspired, and the drinks are Caribbean inspired as well, with the main spirit being rum. But it's been a great experience, man. A really, really great experience. And, you know, I guess one of the most rewarding things for me, you know, has been at times hearing, you know, somebody, you know, might be a little bit younger than me from out of town saying, oh, man, you know, it's so cool to come into a place where I don't have to worry about getting kicked out because I might have a fitted hat on or a hoodie, you know, or an oversized T-shirt, you know. When you read between the lines, you know what that means.
Absolutely.
So, like I said, it's a haven. It's a safe space for us to be and for us to network and to build relationships and like create innovative business partnerships too.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, with everything opening back up right now, people are definitely looking for places to hang out. And Last Lap definitely sounds like a place that I know I will be hanging out as the COVID restrictions get lifted and things are opening back up and people are going out more. Well, listen, Pierre, thank you so much. I've known you for years. You've been a great friend to me, and I think you're doing some great work in the community when it comes to affordable housing. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Josh.
That concludes this week's podcast. You can pick up the latest edition of the New York Amsterdam News on newsstands and get updates online at amsterdamnews.com. You can also keep up with us on Facebook at NY Amsterdam News and follow us on Twitter at NYAmNews. I'm Cyril Josh Barker. Thanks for listening.